Returning now to the reaction to the death of Cardinal George Pell. For more, I'm joined by Archbishop of Hobart, His Grace Julian Porteous. Thank you so much for joining us today. How would you describe George Pell's legacy?
George Pell was a great leader in the Catholic Church in Australia and indeed internationally. His legacy it covers many, many areas. Just a couple of examples that really strike me. One is that he was very conscious that the Catholic Church had a rich heritage in its intellectual tradition, in theology and so forth. Very keen that this be advanced and developed in Australia. So he established a university, Notre Dame University in Sydney. He also had a great love for youth, and he understood very clearly, I think, what was needed to help young people live their faith, embrace the fullness and richness of Catholic faith. And so he organised a World Youth Day in 2008 in Sydney. So many of these aspects of his legacy, I think, have deeply impacted the Church in Australia and will continue, I think, to make an ongoing contribution to the life and direction of the Church in Australia.
And what were his achievements in the Catholic Church?
Look, I think principally he understood the needs of the Church in our time. He was very aware that the Church, to a certain extent, was losing its way, was struggling with all the issues of modernity and so forth. He was a man of deep faith, deeply believed in the tradition of the Church and what the Church could offer society as well as individual lives. So he worked continually in this direction. And another example, for instance, whenever he was responsible for building a chapel or a church, they were beautiful, they were reverent, they were buildings that inspired people. He understood the importance of liturgy, the importance of worship of God. So these kind of elements, which I think are the ground of the Catholic faith, were things that he understood and he wanted to promote and develop, and has done that very, very effectively.
There's no doubt that he had a controversial life, and there's certainly been mixed reaction to his death. Where do you think that he will sit in Australian history?
I think for many people, of course, it's hard at the moment of their death to recognise their contribution to history. I think history will recognise more and more the influence he had in the years, certainly as Archbishop of Melbourne and Sydney, his contribution internationally in the Church, particularly when he was asked to go to Rome and work in Rome. I think in time people will say he was a great leader, a remarkable man, a man too that had a grace, a dignity, a humility about him. They'll see the goodness. I think that came out particularly the way he had to deal with all the difficulties around his trial and imprisonment. He handled that with grace and dignity, you know, and he was willing to forgive those who accused him and those who really orchestrated a great travesty of justice in Australia. So there are these qualities to his character. I think people will see in time he was a great man. He was a man who's made a great contribution to the Church, and in himself was a truly Christian character.
Do you believe that the conviction, which was then, of course, overturned, did that have an impact on the image of the Catholic Church?
It was all connected, of course, with the sexual abuse crisis, which the Church has been working its way through. I mean, Cardinal Pell was one of the first to establish a response to sexual abuse in Melbourne. He was always at the forefront of addressing it and dealing with it. I think he's been unjustly considered not to have responded. He did respond. He paid an enormous personal price himself for it, but he was one who understood this was an issue that needed to be dealt with, and he did deal with it.
What impact do you think his death will have on the Catholic Church in Australia, but also the faithful?
I think, I know so many people have texted me, have talked to me about how much they admire him, how much they love him, how much he has been an inspiration to them. I think there are so many people in Australia and overseas who admire him so greatly, and they will be the ones who will mourn his passing so much, but be conscious of the enormous contribution and inspiration that he has been for them in their faith.
Archbishop of Hobart, Julian Porteous, lovely to speak with you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.